The glass in Dom's hand didn't just shatter. It surrendered. One moment the expensive crystal was filled with amber scotch, and the next, it was a spray of jagged diamonds biting into his palm. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look down at the crimson beads blooming across his skin. His eyes, dark, predatory and burning with a terrifying silver light, were locked on the woman across the gala ballroom. Elena. He was laughing. It was a sound he usually cherished, a melodic chime that settled the chaos in his soul. But tonight that laugh was a serrated blade. She was leaning in toward a man whose name Dom didn't care to know, her hand brushing the stranger's sleeve, her lips curved into a dazzling, genuine smile that he had foolishly convinced himself belonged only to him. Hello to every single one of you tuning in today. It is truly an honor to have you here in this space where stories come alive. Before we dive deeper into the storm brewing in Dom's heart, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I read every single one. How are you doing today? I hope you're ready for a journey of passion and secrets. If you haven't already joined our community, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support is the heartbeat of this channel and we have so much more to share with you. The air in the Grand Pierre ballroom was cloying, thick with the scent of lilies and overpriced perfume, but for Dom Toretto Holloway, the world had narrowed down to a single point of agonizing heat. He was a man who built empires by staying cold, by calculating every move 3 steps ahead of his enemies. He was the billionaire ghost of Wall Street, a man who never let his pulse rise above a steady thrum. Yet watching Elena Corleone Vance toss her head back, her throat exposed and glowing under the chandeliers as she charmed a circle of high society vultures, he felt a primitive volcanic rage erupting from his gut. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a haunting, visceral fear that the light he'd finally found was being shared with people who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as her. He watched the stranger, a young tech mogul with a predatory grin, place a hand on the small of Elena's back. Dom's vision blurred. The civilized man he had spent a decade refining vanished, replaced by something ancient and territorial. He didn't care about the cameras, the shareholders, or the delicate peace treaty he was supposed to sign tonight. Every nerve ending was screaming at him to tear that hand away, to sweep her out of this room and lock her away where the world couldn't stain her. Elena looked up then, her gaze drifting toward the shadows where he stood. For a fleeting second her smile faltered. She saw the blood dripping from his hand onto the white marble floor. She saw the raw, unhinged intensity in his eyes that promised a reckoning. She knew him better than anyone. She knew the darkness he kept caged behind his bespoke suits and cold acquisitions. But as she held his gaze, she didn't look away. Instead, she leaned closer to the stranger, her smile widening into something defiant, something that tasted like a challenge. Dom felt the last thread of his control snap. Why was she doing this? Why was the woman who had promised him her soul suddenly acting like a stranger in a room full of enemies? As he began to stride across the floor, the crowd parting like a sea before a coming storm, a single chilling thought echoed in his mind. If she thinks she can play with fire to see if I'll burn, she's about to realize I'm the one who lit the match. But as he reached her, his hand gripping her arm with a possessive strength that made the tech mogul pale, Elena leaned in and whispered something into Dom's ear that turned his blood from boiling oil to ice. "Don't look now, Dom," she breathed, her voice trembling despite her smile. "But the man you're so jealous of? He's holding a detonator and he's waiting for you to touch me." Dom froze. The ballroom, the music, the jealousy, it all vanished, replaced by the realization that his pride had just walked them both into a lethal trap. Was this the end of the empire he'd built, or was the real betrayal yet to come? The grip Dom held on Elena's arm didn't loosen, but it transformed. It was no longer the grasp of a jealous lover. It was the anchored hold of a man trying to keep them both grounded in a world that had suddenly become a minefield. He forced his facial muscles into a mask of granite, the ghost of Wall Street, persona sliding back into place, even as his heart thundered against his ribs like a caged beast. To the outside observer, Dom Toretto Holloway was the pinnacle of success. He was a man who had clawed his way out of a childhood defined by silence and scarcity to become a titan who moved markets with a whisper. He had built a life where everything was curated, controlled, and cold. He lived in a penthouse of glass and steel, surrounded by things that didn't breathe, didn't want, and, most importantly, didn't hurt. He had convinced himself that emotions were a liability, a flaw in the code of a high-functioning life. Then came Elena. Elena Corleone Vance wasn't supposed to be a permanent fixture. She was a brilliant consultant hired to navigate the treacherous waters of an overseas merger. But from the moment she walked into his boardroom, wearing a suit that was sharper than his own and eyes that saw through his carefully constructed armor, the walls began to crumble. Elena was everything Dom was not: vibrant, empathetic, and dangerously intuitive. She moved through the world with a warmth that felt like a personal affront to his icy isolation. Dom's deepest desire was one he never dared to name: to be seen, truly seen, and still wanted. But his deepest fear, the one that kept him awake at 3 a.m. staring at the city lights, was that the darkness inside him, the jagged edges left behind by his rise to power, would eventually destroy anything he tried to love. Standing in the center of the ballroom, Dom looked down at Elena. Her eyes were wide, scanning the room while she kept that practiced, fake smile pinned to her face. She was a master of the social dance, a skill she'd learned as the daughter of a disgraced political family. She had spent her life navigating the ruins of her father's reputation, building her own career from the ashes. She valued her independence above all else, having seen how easily a woman could be swallowed by a powerful man's shadow. 20 seconds, Elena whispered, her lips barely moving as she laughed for the benefit of the crowd. He's watching the clock. He's not here for the money, Dom. He's here for the statement. The man she had been talking to, the one Dom had almost struck out of pure hot jealousy, was Julian, a tech wunderkind who had been a rival of Dom's for years. But Julian wasn't a rival tonight. He was a puppet. Dom looked past Julian toward the bar, where a man in a waiter's uniform was watching them with a stillness that didn't belong in a room full of movement. I want to take a quick moment to thank you for being here with us. This story is just getting started and the stakes are about to get even higher. If you're enjoying the tension and the mystery, please make sure you've liked this video and left a comment below. What do you think the man at the bar is planning? Your theories keep this channel going, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to join our family so you never miss a chapter of this journey. Dom felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it nearly blinded him. He had spent months telling himself she was just an asset, just a woman who happened to be in his orbit. He had lied to his lawyers, his board, and his mirror. But as the realization of the threat sunk in, the lie disintegrated. He didn't just want her, he needed her. She was the only thing in his life that felt real, the only soul that made the silence of his penthouse unbearable. Why didn't you tell me? Dom hissed, his voice a low vibration of fury and fear. Why did you come here alone? Because you were too busy trying to pretend I didn't exist, Elena countered, her voice catching for a split second. You pushed me away for weeks, Dom. You treated me like a line on a balance sheet. I had to find out about the threat on my own. I thought if I could get close to Julian I could stop it before you even knew. The irony was a bitter pill. His attempt to protect himself from his feelings for her had left her vulnerable. His controlled world was a house of cards and the wind was picking up. Behind them the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz. The lights dimmed slightly, casting long, skeletal shadows across the marble. Dom looked at Julian, then at the waiter, and finally back to the woman who held his heart in her hands without even knowing it. He saw the flicker of vulnerability in Elena's eyes, the fear she was trying so hard to hide behind her Corleone Vance pride. He realized then that the jealousy he had felt moments ago wasn't just about Julian. It was about the fact that anyone else could make her smile while he was the one making her bleed. He was the millionaire who had everything, yet he was standing in a room full of people, potentially seconds away from losing the only thing that actually mattered. We're getting out of here, Dom said, his voice dropping into that authoritative tone that had ended 1,000 negotiations. We can't just run, Elena whispered. The moment we move toward the exit, he'll press it. We have to finish the dance, Dom. Literally. She reached out, taking his wounded hand in hers. The blood from his palm smeared against her white silk glove, a stark, visceral mark of the violence that was always simmering just beneath the surface of their lives. She pulled him toward the dance floor, forced to maintain the charade of the jealous lover and the captivating beauty, while a literal countdown ticked away in the shadows. As they moved into the first steps of the waltz, Dom pulled her flush against him. The heat of her body was the only thing keeping him from shattering. He could feel the eyes of the ballroom on them, the whispers of the ghost finally showing a crack in his armor. But as he looked into Elena's eyes, he saw a secret there, a depth of feeling she hadn't yet voiced. The question wasn't just whether they would survive the night. The question was whether Dom could survive the truth, that he was no longer the master of his own fate. He was an addict, and Elena was the only thing he craved. The waltz was a lie. Every graceful turn and synchronized step was a mask for the frantic strategy occurring between them. Dom's hand, still slick with blood, rested on the small of Elena's back, feeling the fine tremors she was trying so hard to suppress. The tech mogul Julian remained at the edge of the floor, his eyes fixed on them with a chilling, vacant intensity. He wasn't dancing, he was spectating a tragedy he had authored. The waiter at the bar, Dom muttered, his lips brushing Elena's ear as if offering a tender confidence. He's not moving. His right hand is buried in his towel. That's our trigger man. If we bolt for the north exit, he'll blow the foyer, Elena whispered back, her breath hitching as Dom spun her. He told me the moment you tried to take me away, he'd end the monopoly you have on this city. He's obsessed, Dom. He thinks you're a tyrant that needs to be toppled. The inciting incident hadn't just been the sight of Elena smiling at another man. It was the realization that his jealousy had blinded him to the predator in the room. Dom had been so focused on the perceived threat to his possession of Elena that he'd failed to see the literal threat to her life. The stakes had shifted from a bruised ego to a fight for survival. Suddenly, the music took a sharp, discordant turn. The lead violinist snapped a string, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hall. The crowd gasped, a ripple of unease breaking the high society decorum. In that split second of confusion, Julian stepped forward, a glass of champagne in his hand, his smile widening into something jagged. Dom. Elena. Julian called out, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Why so tense? It's a celebration. To the merger of the century, or should I say the funeral of an empire. The room went deathly silent. This wasn't part of the script. The ghost of Wall Street was being publicly challenged. Dom felt the primal urge to lunge, to wrap his hands around Julian's throat until the man's smug face turned purple. But Elena's fingers tightened on his shoulder, a silent plea for restraint. Don't, she breathed. He wants the reaction. He wants you to prove you're the monster the papers say you are. It was the ultimate decision. Dom could act on his rage, fulfilling Julian's prophecy and likely triggering the waiter's thumb, or he could do the one thing no one expected from a man of his reputation. He could yield. Before Dom could move, the waiter at the bar began to walk toward the center of the dance floor. He wasn't carrying a tray. He was moving with a military precision that screamed, hired professional. The guests, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to back away, creating a hollow circle around Dom, Elena, and the approaching threat. I have a gift for you, Mr. Holloway, the waiter said, his voice devoid of emotion. He reached into his jacket, not for a detonator but for a high-resolution tablet. He flicked the screen on and held it up for the room to see. The image on the screen stopped Dom's heart. It was a live feed of his private vault, the one place in the world he thought was impenetrable. Inside the vault sat a single weathered leather journal. His mother's journal. The only thing he had left of the life he'd lost before he became a millionaire. I don't need a bomb to destroy you, Dom, Julian said, stepping closer, his voice a low, venomous hiss. I just need to burn the only thing you actually love. Unless, of course, you're willing to trade. The Corleone-Vance merger contracts for the journal. You have 5 minutes before the incendiary charge inside that vault levels your penthouse. The twist hit Dom like a physical blow. The detonator Elena had warned him about wasn't for the ballroom, it was for his past. Julian had played on Dom's notorious jealousy and protectiveness, knowing he would focus all his energy on Elena, leaving his flank exposed. Dom looked at Elena. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of horror and realization. She had been used as the ultimate red herring. The jealousy that had exploded in his chest earlier tonight had been the very tool Julian used to distract him. Dom. Elena started, her voice trembling. The journal. You can't lose that. It's everything. But as Dom looked at the man holding the tablet and the man holding the power, he realized the choice wasn't about a book or a contract. It was about whether he would let his fear of loss continue to dictate his life. You think you know what I love? Dom said, his voice coming out as a low, dangerous growl that silenced the remaining whispers in the room. He didn't look at the tablet. He didn't look at Julian. He looked directly at Elena, his hand moving from her waist to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. In that moment, the ghost made a choice that changed the trajectory of the night. He took the merger contracts from his inner pocket, the documents that represented 3 years of his life and billions in revenue, and ripped them in half. The room gasped. Julian's jaw dropped. "The journal is paper," Dom said, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying clarity. "But she is mine. And you just made the mistake of thinking I'd negotiate for either." Before Julian could react, Dom didn't go for the contracts or the tablet. He grabbed the heavy crystal centerpiece from a nearby table and hurled it with lethal accuracy, not at Julian but at the fire alarm on the far wall. The shrill scream of the alarm erupted, followed instantly by the overhead sprinklers. Chaos broke out as hundreds of elite guests began to scream and scramble for the exits. In the deluge of freezing water and panicked bodies, the waiter lost his footing and the tablet clattered to the floor. "Run!" Dom yelled, grabbing Elena's hand and pulling her into the swarm. The hunt was on. The jealousy was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened adrenaline. They weren't just escaping a ballroom. They were escaping the trap of Dom's own making. But as they burst through the side doors into the rain-slicked alleyway, a black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking their path. The door slid open and a figure emerged that made Elena freeze in her tracks. The figure stepping out of the black SUV wasn't a hired thug. It was a woman with silver-spun hair and eyes that matched Dom's, cold, calculating and weary. "Mother." Dom's voice was a ragged whisper, the word nearly lost to the hiss of the rain and the distant shriek of the Gala's fire alarm. "Get in, Dominic. Now," she commanded. They scrambled into the leather-scented sanctuary of the vehicle. As the driver, a man with a jagged scar across his temple, peeled away from the curb, the silence inside was deafening. Dom's hand was still clamped around Elena's, his knuckles white. The hot, suffocating jealousy that had started the night had evolved into a cold, sharp-edged paranoia. "I thought you were in Zurich," Dom said, his voice regaining its steel. "And I thought Julian had your journal in my vault." "Julian has a decoy, you fool," his mother, Evelyn, snapped, though her eyes softened as they landed on Elena. "He's been planning to liquidate your holdings for months. He didn't just want your company, he wanted to erase your legacy. He knew if he triggered your temper, if he made you think Elena was drifting, you'd stop looking at the ledgers and start looking at the exits." Elena pulled her hand back, her face flushing with a mix of anger and hurt. "So this was all a game? The flirting, the threat, at the gala. Julian used me as a visual trigger because he knew Dom couldn't handle seeing me with anyone else. He knew Dom's obsession was his greatest weakness," Evelyn said quietly. "I want to take a second to check in with you. This story is taking a dark turn and the mystery is only deepening. If you're enjoying the twists and turns of Dom and Elena's journey, please take a moment to leave a comment below. What would you do if you realized your emotions were being used against you? Also, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We're on a mission to bring you the most intense stories every week and we can't do it without you." For the next hour, the SUV became a mobile war room. As they sped toward a safe house on the outskirts of the city, the romantic tension between Dom and Elena reached a breaking point. Every time their shoulders brushed in the cramped back seat, a spark of electricity, half passion, half fury, jolted through the cabin. "You let him lead you by the nose, Dom," Elena whispered, her voice low so Evelyn wouldn't hear. "You saw me talking to Julian and you didn't think, security breach. You thought mine. You broke a glass in your bare hand because I smiled at a man who was literally holding a knife to our throats. Do you even trust me? Or am I just a trophy you're afraid someone will steal?" Dom looked at her, the rain streaking the window behind her head like tears. "It's not about trust, Elena. It's about the fact that when I look at you, the rest of the world goes gray. Can't think. I can't calculate. I need you to be safe." "Safe isn't the same as loved, Dom," she countered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be kept in a vault like your mother's journal." The car swerved suddenly, tires screaming as the driver evaded a gray sedan that had been tailing them since the bridge. Dom lunged across the seat, shielding Elena with his body as they took a sharp corner. The proximity was intoxicating, the scent of her rain-dampened skin, the heat radiating off her. For a heartbeat, the danger outside didn't matter. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath hitching. "I'm going to fix this," he vowed. I'm going to take everything Julian has. Not for the money. Not for the empire. But because he tried to use you to get to me. He didn't try, Dom, Elena said, her eyes searching his. He succeeded. Look at us. We're running. They arrived at the safe house, a nondescript concrete structure hidden behind a defunct shipyard. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of salt. Evelyn began pulling up monitors showing the fallout from the gala. Julian was already spinning the narrative, telling the press that Dom Toretto Holloway had suffered a mental breakdown and destroyed his own event. But as Dom watched the screens, he noticed something odd. A red herring Julian had planted, a series of wire transfers that seemed to link Elena's personal accounts to Julian's shell companies. Dom, I didn't, Elena started, seeing the data. I know, Dom cut her off, his voice surprisingly calm. The jealousy was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical focus. He wants me to doubt you again. He wants me to think this was a long con. But I saw the way you looked at the waiter. You weren't in on it. You were terrified. He walked over to a heavy iron table and began sketching out a counterattack. He was growing through the adversity, realizing that to beat Julian he had to stop being the jealous tiger and start being the architect. Evelyn, call our contacts in the shipping district, Dom commanded. If Julian wants a funeral for an empire, we're going to make sure he's the one in the casket. But as the night wore on, the tension shifted from the external threat to the internal one. Elena found Dom standing by a window overlooking the dark water. She walked up behind him, hesitant. You're bleeding again, she said softly, noting his palm. He turned, and the look in his eyes wasn't cold anymore. It was raw. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. I've spent my whole life building walls, Elena. Tonight I realized they aren't protecting me. They're just making it easier for people like Julian to trap me inside. He leaned in, his lips inches from hers. If we get through this, I'm done with the ghost. I just want to be the man who deserves you. They were interrupted by the sound of a heavy door being kicked in downstairs. The gray sedan hadn't been the only tale. They're here, Evelyn shouted from the monitor room. Dom grabbed a heavy flashlight and a flare gun from the emergency kit. He looked at Elena, a grim, determined smile on his face. Stay behind me. We're about to show them what happens when you push a millionaire too far. The safe house was no longer safe. The sound of boots pounding against the concrete stairs echoed like a death knell. Dom shoved Elena behind a heavy steel desk, his hand reaching for the flare gun, but Evelyn stayed him with a cold, firm grip on his wrist. Wait, his mother whispered, her eyes fixed on the security monitor. Look at the lead man. Dom squinted at the grainy black and white feed. The man leading the breach wasn't wearing Julian's corporate security colors. He was wearing a tactical vest with a logo Dom recognized. A logo from his own private security firm. They're my men, Dom breathed, a wave of confusion washing over him. Why are they breaking in? Because they aren't on your payroll anymore, Dominic. A voice crackled over the safe house's intercom. It wasn't Julian. It was a voice deeper, older, and far more familiar. The door to the monitor room hissed open. Standing there, flanked by two of Dom's former elite guards, was a man Dom had mourned for 15 years. Father. Arthur Toretto Holloway stepped into the light. He looked older, his face a roadmap of scars and survival, but the predatory glint in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't the ghost Dom had imagined. He was a living, breathing betrayal. You're alive, Dom said, the words tasting like ash. All this time, the funeral, the missing plane, the inheritance, it was a lie? It was a necessity, Arthur said, his voice devoid of paternal warmth. I had to see if you could build an empire on your own. I had to see if you had the stomach for the top. But I've been watching you lately, Dominic. You've grown soft. You've grown distracted. Arthur's gaze slid to Elena, who was standing slowly from behind the desk, her face a mask of pure shock. Julian didn't find your mother's journal on his own, Dom, Arthur continued, paced the room with the grace of a wolf. I gave it to him. I coached him. I needed a catalyst to see where your loyalties truly lay. And tonight at that gala you showed me exactly what I feared. You're willing to burn 3 years of work and billions of dollars for a woman's smile. The revelation was a physical blow, more devastating than any explosion. The hot jealousy that had consumed Dom all night hadn't just been a personal failing. It had been the final exam in a twisted game of psychological warfare orchestrated by his own father. Every move Julian made had been authorized by the man Dom had spent his life trying to honor. "You used Julian to bait me," Dom said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating low. "You let him threaten Elena's life just to test my focus?" "I let him threaten her to show you she is a liability," Arthur countered. "A man in your position cannot afford to have a heart that beats outside his own chest. You destroyed the merger contracts. You chose her over the legacy. You failed Dominic." Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "He didn't fail. He chose to be a human being instead of a machine like you." Arthur laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "A human being is just a corpse that hasn't stopped breathing yet in this business. But here's the real twist, Dominic. Julian isn't just my puppet. He's your replacement. As of midnight, the board has received a certified letter from my estate, which I have legally reclaimed, naming Julian as the new chairman of Holloway International. You're broke, son. You have nothing but the clothes on your back and the woman who cost you everything. I want to take a moment to pause here. The betrayal is deep and the stakes have never been higher. How are you feeling about Arthur's return? Let me know in the comments if you saw this coming. If you're rooting for Dom and Elena to take back what's theirs, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep these intense stories coming every single week. Dom felt the world shifting beneath his feet. Everything he believed about his past, his grief, his drive, his very identity, was a fabrication. He looked at his mother, Evelyn. She was standing by the monitors, her face unreadable. "Did you know?" Dom asked her. Evelyn looked at Arthur, then back at her son. "I knew he was alive. I didn't know he would go this far to break you." The midpoint revelation had completely shifted the story's direction. Dom wasn't fighting a corporate rival anymore. He was fighting a ghost who had come back to reclaim his throne. The stakes weren't just about a company. They were about Dom's right to exist as a man of his own making. Arthur signaled to the guards. "Take them. I want them moved to the holding facility at the docks. We'll settle the final paperwork there." As the guards stepped forward, Dom caught Elena's eye. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the romantic connection deepened into something unbreakable. They weren't just lovers or partners. They were the only two people in the world who were real to each other. "I'm sorry," Dom whispered as the guards grabbed his arms. "Don't be," Elena replied, her eyes burning with a sudden fierce light. "Because now he's going to find out what happens when you take everything from a man who has nothing left to lose but the woman he loves." As they were led out into the cold night toward the docks, Dom realized that Arthur had made one fatal mistake. He thought Dom's love for Elena was a weakness. He didn't realize it was the only thing that could give him the strength to commit a sin his father never could, to burn the whole empire down just to keep her warm. The holding facility was a rusted shipping container suspended 20 feet above the churning black waters of the Atlantic. Inside, the air was metallic and freezing, vibrating with the low hum of the harbor's industrial machinery. Dom and Elena sat on the cold floor, their wrists bound with heavy-duty zip ties that bit into their skin with every movement. The separation wasn't physical but emotional. For the first time since the gala began, a wall of silence had risen between them. Dom stared at the corrugated steel wall, his eyes hollow. He had lost it all. His company, his reputation, his mother's loyalty, and the memory of a father he had spent 15 years grieving. The weight of the betrayal was an insurmountable obstacle, pressing down on his chest until every breath felt like a struggle against drowning. "Dom," Elena whispered, her voice cracking in the dark. "Look at me." "He was right," Dom said, his voice a jagged shard of its former self. "Everything I touched, I destroyed. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just dragging you into a graveyard. You should have stayed away from me, Elena. You should have let me be the ghost, until I just faded away." The despair in his voice was a physical blow. He had reached his breaking point. The man who had commanded boardrooms and moved billions was reduced to a broken shadow in a metal box. He felt the crushing hopelessness of their situation. They were trapped, unarmed, and being erased from the world by the very man who had given Dom life. "Don't you dare," Elena hissed, scooting closer until her shoulder pressed against his. "Don't you dare give him the satisfaction of breaking your spirit before he even kills us. You aren't a ghost, Dominic. You're the man who ripped up $1 billion contract because you couldn't stand to see me hurt." That's not a failure. That's the only real thing in this entire city. It doesn't matter, Dom groaned, leaning his head back against the cold steel. Julian has the codes. Arthur has the board. By sunrise, Holloway International will be a memory and will be at the bottom of this harbor. I failed you, Elena. I let my jealousy distract me and I let my pride blind me. The romantic connection that had been their anchor now felt like a lead weight. Dom was consumed by the fear that his love had been Elena's death warrant. He couldn't bear to look at her, knowing that her vibrant life was being snuffed out because of his family's ancient, poisonous feuds. Outside, the crane groaned. The container lurched, swaying violently as it began to move. They were being positioned over the drop zone. I want to speak to you directly for a moment. This is the moment where everything seems lost. Have you ever felt like the world was closing in on you and there was no way out? It's in these darkest hours that we find out who we truly are. If you're holding your breath for Dom and Elena, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your support is the light that keeps us going through these dark chapters. The door to the container flickered open just an inch, a small observation slot. Arthur's face appeared, illuminated by the harsh yellow glow of the dock lights. Last chance, Dominic, Arthur said, his voice echoing in the small space. Sign the digital waiver. Relinquish the offshore accounts you hid from the board. Do it and I'll let the girl walk. You stay here but she goes free. The ultimate test of his deepest fear. If he signed, he gave Arthur the final piece of the empire, effectively vanishing into the void. If he didn't, Elena died with him. Dom, don't do it, Elena pleaded. He's lying. He won't let me go. I have to, Dom whispered, tears finally stinging his eyes. I can't let you die for my sins. Dom reached toward the tablet Arthur pushed through the slot. His fingers hovered over the biometric scanner. He was ready to surrender everything, his legacy, his future, his very name, just for a chance at her survival. He was at his most vulnerable, stripped of his millionaire status, left only with the raw, agonizing love of a man who had lost his way. As his thumb touched the glass, the crane suddenly lurched. A massive explosion rocked the docks, the shockwave nearly throwing the container off its cable. Screams erupted from outside, followed by the rapid-fire chatter of automatic weapons. Arthur's face vanished from the slot, replaced by the orange glow of a growing fire. What's happening? Elena cried out as the container swung wildly, slamming against the side of a freighter. Dom pulled himself up, his eyes narrowing as he peered through the slot. Through the smoke and the rain, he saw a fleet of black sedans swerving onto the pier. But they weren't Arthur's. And they weren't Julian's. Across the side of the lead vehicle in bold white lettering was the name of a movie-inspired security firm Dom had secretly funded years ago as a contingency, a firm Arthur didn't know existed. But before hope could take root, the cable holding the container snapped with a sound like a thunderclap. They weren't being rescued. They were falling. The world inverted. The stomach-churning drop was followed by a bone-jarring impact as the shipping container slammed into the freezing Atlantic. Water didn't just seep in, it exploded through the seams, a frigid, black tide that rose to their waists in seconds. Dom! Elena screamed, her voice nearly drowned out by the roar of the ocean outside. But the impact hadn't just broken the container. It had shattered the mental fog of Dom's despair. The cold was a catalyst. As the water reached his chest, Dom didn't see the end, he saw the opening. The jagged hole where the crane's hook had ripped through the roof was now their only exit. Elena, look at me. Dom shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. I'm not letting you go. Not now, not ever. We are getting out of this and we are taking back everything they stole. In that moment the millionaire died and the man, raw, powerful and driven by a love that transcended ledger sheets, was born. He found a piece of jagged rebar loosened by the fall. With a roar of effort that strained every muscle in his back, he wedged it into his zip ties, using the leverage of the sinking container to snap the plastic. He was free. He lunged for Elena, slicing her bonds with the same metal shard just as the water reached their chins. They shared a frantic, desperate kiss, a seal of their new, deeper understanding. There was no jealousy now, no possessiveness, only the absolute, synchronized courage of two souls who had decided that the world wasn't big enough for their enemies and their love. On 3, Dom commanded. Swim for the surface. My team is up there. They don't know the container dropped, but they'll see the bubbles. They breached the surface of the harbor amidst a hellscape of fire and steel. Above them on the pier the battle was raging. But as Dom hauled Elena onto a floating dock, he saw the turning point. His mother, Evelyn, was standing at the edge of the pier holding a flare gun. She wasn't looking at the shooters. She was looking at Arthur. And she wasn't cowering. "Dominic," she yelled, spotting them. She tossed a waterproof satchel into the water toward them. Dom grabbed it. Inside wasn't money. It was a hard drive, the real one. The one containing the encryption keys to every shadow account Arthur had spent 30 years building. Evelyn hadn't been a bystander. She had been the mole waiting for Arthur to reveal his hand so she could cut it off. "I want to hear from you right now. Did you expect Evelyn to be the one to turn the tide?" The courage it takes to stand up to a ghost from the past is immense. If you're cheering for this family to finally find justice, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing the most intense climax we've ever produced. Join us now. "The keys, Dom," Elena breathed, shivering but eyes blazing with hope. "If we can get to the relay station at the end of the pier, we can broadcast those files. We won't just stop Julian, we'll bankrupt Arthur before the sun comes up." Hope, potent and electric, surged through Dom's veins. He looked at the woman beside him, the woman he had almost lost to his own insecurity. She was the key. She was the reason he was still breathing. "We don't just broadcast them," Dom said, a predatory smile finally returning to his face. "We invite the world to watch the ghost return for his inheritance." They moved with a newfound unity, slipping through the shadows of the shipping crates. They weren't running anymore. They were hunting. The central conflict hadn't been solved by a bank balance, but by the inner strength Dom found in the realization that he didn't need an empire to be a king. He just needed the queen standing beside him. As they reached the base of the relay tower, Julian stepped out from behind a generator, a silenced pistol trembling in his hand. He looked frantic, his polished veneer cracked by the chaos. "It's over, Dom," Julian shrieked. "Arthur's gone. He fled. Give me the drive and I'll let you live." Dom didn't flinch. He walked toward the barrel of the gun, his hand out. "You still don't get it, Julian. You were never a player. You were just the distraction. And the distraction is over." Before Julian could pull the trigger, a red dot appeared on his chest. Dom's private security team had crested the ridge. The final confrontation was set. The light of the rising sun began to bleed over the horizon, signaling not just the end of the night, but the beginning of a reckoning. The relay tower hummed with a low-frequency vibration as the sun's first rays hit the jagged skyline of the city. Julian's hand shook, the pistol a heavy weight he was never meant to carry. He looked at the red dot on his chest, then back at Dom, who was advancing with the steady, unstoppable gait of a man who had already survived the worst the world could throw at him. "Drop it, Julian." Dom's voice was a low, resonant command that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "You're a numbers man, not a killer. Calculate the odds. You've lost the board, you've lost Arthur, and in approximately 60 seconds, you're going to lose your freedom." With a choked sob of pure, unadulterated terror, Julian let the gun clatter to the metal grating. He collapsed to his knees, his face buried in his hands. Dom didn't even give him a second glance. He stepped past the broken man, pulling the hard drive from the satchel and slamming it into the tower's primary uplink port. "Elena now," Dom said. Elena stepped up to the console, her fingers flying across the keys with a precision born of years of high-stakes consulting. "Accessing the global broadcast node. Bypassing the hallway firewall. Dom, I'm into Arthur's shadow ledger. It's all here. The bribes, the staged disappearance, the offshore laundering that built Julian's tech shell. If I hit enter, the entire world sees the truth." "Do it," Dom said. "Let the ghost go out in a blaze of glory." As Elena struck the final key, every screen in the financial district, from the massive tickers in Times Square to the private tablets of every CEO on the planet, flickered. The image of Arthur Toretto Holloway's living face appeared, followed by a waterfall of incriminating data that liquidated his power in real time. The empire wasn't just being saved, it was being purged. But the resolution wasn't just digital. A heavy thud sounded on the roof of the relay station. A helicopter, unmarked and black, hovered dangerously close, its rotors kicking up a cyclonic wind. Arthur was standing in the open bay, a rifle in his hand. He wasn't fleeing anymore. He was coming for the one thing that had defied him. Dominic. Arthur's voice boomed over the roar of the engines. You think a few files change who you are? You are my blood. You are built for this darkness. Arthur raised the rifle, aiming directly at Elena. In that split second, Dom didn't calculate. He didn't hesitate. He used the skills he had developed as a man who lived in the shadows, but he used them for light. He lunged, not for cover but toward the tower's manual override lever. With a primal roar, he yanked the lever, swinging the massive satellite dish toward the helicopter. The heavy equipment collided with the landing skids, throwing the aircraft off balance. Arthur fired, but the shot went wide, shattering a glass insulator above them. The helicopter spun, tail rotor smoking, and was forced to peel away, disappearing into the morning mist toward the international waters he could no longer call home. Dom stood at the edge of the platform, chest heaving, watching the predator retreat. He turned to Elena, who was already running toward him. She threw her arms around his neck, and for the first time in his adult life, Dom Toretto Holloway didn't feel like a millionaire or a ghost or a titan. He felt human. I hope you're still with us because this is the moment we've all been waiting for. The triumph of love over cold, calculated greed. What did you think of that final showdown? Was Arthur's escape a sign of things to come, or is he gone for good? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories where the underdog takes back their life, make sure you've subscribed and hit that notification bell. Your engagement is what makes these stories possible. The twist wasn't the data or the helicopter. The twist was the silence that followed. Dom looked out at the city he had once tried to own, realizing he didn't want it anymore. He didn't need a skyscraper to feel tall. He looked at the blood on his hands, Arthur's legacy, and then at Elena's face, which was illuminated by the golden dawn. It's over, Elena whispered, her forehead resting against his. The board is calling. The police are at the docks for Julian. You're the most powerful man in the city again, Dom. No, Dom said, a genuine soft smile breaking through his rugged features. I'm just a man who's going to take you to breakfast. The city can wait. He was at his most heroic and authentic, not because he had won his company back, but because he was finally willing to let go of the jealousy and the fear that had kept him a prisoner of his own wealth. He had confronted the ultimate antagonist, his own father, and chose a path of justice and love over the cycle of betrayal. The penthouse was no longer a cold museum of glass and steel. 6 months after the night of the gala, the sunlight that flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt like a benediction. Dom Toretto Holloway stood by the balcony, but he wasn't looking at the stock tickers or the fluctuating markets of the city below. He was watching the reflection of the woman behind him in the glass. Elena Corleone Vance walked into the room, her footsteps light, no longer burdened by the heavy armor of a corporate consultant or the shadow of her family's past. She wore a simple silk dress, her hair loose, and when she smiled at Dom, it wasn't a tactical maneuver or a mask for the cameras. It was a smile that belonged to him and him alone. Not because he owned her, but because he had finally learned how to deserve her. The board meeting is in an hour, Dominic, she said, leaning against the doorframe. They're waiting for the new chairman to sign the foundation papers. Are you ready to give away half the empire? Dom turned, his rugged features softening in a way the ghost of Wall Street would never have allowed. I'm ready to start building something that actually matters. The Holloway Foundation isn't about legacy, Elena. It's about making sure no one else has to grow up in the dark like I did. The transformation was complete. Dom had dismantled the predatory structures his father had built, replacing them with a company centered on transparency and human impact. He had settled the romantic subplot not with a signed contract, but with a daily commitment to vulnerability. He no longer felt the hot jealousy that had once threatened to consume him. When he saw Elena laughing with his team or charming a room of strangers, he felt only pride, the quiet, steady confidence of a man who knew that her heart was a gift, not a trophy. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sticking with us through this 40-minute journey of passion, betrayal, and ultimate victory. Seeing Dom and Elena find their way back to each other reminds us that no matter how much wealth you have, the only thing truly worth possessing is a love that sets you free. What was your favorite moment of the story? Was it the explosion at the docks or the final revelation of the hard drive? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of story lovers. We have so many more emotional adventures waiting for you. Evelyn called from the coast, Elena added, walking over to join him at the window. She says the air is clear. No sign of Arthur. The world is too small for him now that his secrets are currency. Dom nodded, pulling Elena into his arms. The silence between them was no longer filled with unspoken fears or calculated moves. It was a peaceful, fulfilling quiet. He had tied up every loose end, from the recovery of his mother's real journal to the legal dismantling of Julian's shell companies. Julian was serving time, a small footnote in a much larger story of redemption. You know, Dom whispered, his lips brushing her temple, I used to think that smile of yours was a danger to my world. I thought if I didn't keep it for myself I'd lose everything. Elena looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and deep affection. And now, Dom said, his voice thick with a joy he had never known was possible, I realize that your smile is the only world I ever want to live in. As the two of them walked out of the penthouse together, heading toward a future they had built on the ruins of a dark past, the camera lingered on the balcony. There, sitting on a small wooden table, was the weathered leather journal of Dom's mother. It was open to the final page, where a new entry had been made in Dom's sharp, steady hand. The empire is gone. The man has finally come home. The screen faded to a warm, golden amber, leaving the viewers with a sense of peace, fulfillment, and the anticipation of new beginnings. Love hadn't just won the night, it had conquered the ghost.